walked off the field after a game and thought, I don't get it. I do this all the time in practice. You're definitely not alone. It's one of the most common frustrations I hear from athletes. They'll tell me I can make that shot in practice every single time, or I hit this perfectly on the driving range, or I execute this skill all week, but then when the game starts, it feels like I've never done it before. What's frustrating is that nothing about your physical ability changed. You didn't suddenly lose years of training between practice on Thursday and the game on Saturday. Yet somehow the skill that felt automatic in practice suddenly feels difficult, awkward, or unreliable when it matters most. Most athletes assume this means they have a confidence problem or that they just need more game experience. While those things can certainly play a role, I actually think they're missing something much bigger. The biggest difference between practice and competition usually isn't the skill you're performing, it's the internal environment in which you're performing it. Think about what practice is typically like. You're experimenting, you're learning. If you make a mistake, it's expected. Maybe your coach gives you feedback, you reset, and try again. The consequences are relatively small. Your attention tends to stay on learning, improving, and performing the task itself. Now compare that to competition. Suddenly, every play feels like it matters. Every mistake seems more significant. You start thinking about the score, the coach, your teammates, your parents, the scouts in the stands, whether you'll lose your starting position, or what this game says about you as an athlete. Without even realizing it, your attention begins moving away from simply performing and toward everything surrounding the performance. The game didn't just change, your experience of the game changed. That's an important distinction. Imagine learning to drive in an empty parking lot. You become comfortable with the steering wheel, the pedals, and making turns. Then one day someone puts you on a busy freeway during rush hour. The car hasn't changed, your driving skills haven't suddenly disappeared, but your internal experience is completely different. There are more consequences, more uncertainty, and more things competing for your attention. Competition often works the same way. It's not that you've lost your ability, it's that you're now performing within an entirely different internal environment. One of the biggest mistakes athletes make is trying to recreate the feeling of practice during competition. They'll say things like, I just need to treat it like practice. While I understand what they're trying to do, and for some that does actually help, I don't actually think that can always be the goal. A game isn't supposed to feel like practice. Competition matters. Your body knows it matters. Your nervous system knows it matters. Pretending otherwise usually doesn't work. The real question isn't, how do I make competition feel like practice? The better question is, how do I learn to perform well in the internal environment that competition naturally creates? Those are two very different challenges. When the stakes feel higher, your attention naturally wants to drift toward outcomes. It wants to monitor mistakes. It wants to predict what might happen next. It wants to protect you from failure. None of those responses mean you're mentally weak. They're simply natural responses to perceived consequence. The problem is that when your attention becomes occupied by all of those things, it has fewer resources available for the actual performance. This is why I often say that pressure doesn't necessarily change your ability, it changes what you have access to. Under pressure, athletes often lose access to clear decision making. They lose access to fluid movement. They lose access to creativity, awareness, timing, and trust. Those capacities haven't disappeared. They've simply become less available because the internal environment has changed. Once you begin looking at performance this way, the solution also changes. Instead of only practicing your technical skills, you begin training your internal systems. You begin noticing where your attention goes under pressure. You begin recognizing the stories your mind creates when the stakes get higher. You learn how your body responds to consequence. You develop the ability to stay connected to what's happening instead of getting pulled into everything that might happen. That's a completely different kind of training, and yet it's often the missing piece for athletes who perform beautifully in practice, but struggle to bring that same performance into competitions. The athlete who consistently perform well under pressure usually aren't the ones who never feel nervous. They're the ones who have learned how to function effectively within that different internal environment. They don't wait until they feel exactly like they do in practice. They learn how to stay available even when competition feels different. So if you've been asking yourself why you perform better in practice than games, I'd encourage you to stop assuming something is wrong with your confidence or your ability. Instead, get curious and ask yourself what changes inside me when the game starts. Where does my attention go? What suddenly feels important? What am I trying to avoid? What story am I telling myself about what this moment means? Those questions will often teach you far more than simply trying to be more confident, because once you understand that competition creates a different internal environment, you can begin training for that environment instead of fighting against it. And that's often when athletes finally start bringing their practice performance into competition, not because they made games feel like practice, but because they learned how to perform in the reality of competition.